Let's move on to Washington. The Huskies are down. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Huskies are down relative to where that program expects to be. New head coach coming in Kalen DeBoer. But before we get to what he needs to do to turn things around, specifically on the recruiting trail, given that is your area of expertise, as you've watched the program and such over the years, how do you think Washington has fallen so far down, relative to where they were really not that long ago? I mean, it was 2017 when they were in the college football playoff. You go from that, right, almost at the top of the sport 5 years ago to now bottom third in the recruiting and transfer portal rankings in the Pac-12 conference, not just nationally, but in the Pac-12 conference, 4-8 in 2021. Like, what do you think happened here?
Transition, it's just hard. One time it's hard, right? I think everybody could agree. Transitioning at the top is very hard, but you do it twice in 3 years, and you're multiplying the difficulty in terms of trying to establish who in the world you are as a recruiting program. And I think Washington has had its moments on the recruiting trail. They're still known more for identification and development than just winning top tier battles. But I do think there was still an identity there. And I'm not sure what exists now in terms of Washington recruiting. I think it's mostly regional now, into the Pacific Northwest. And what is the niche with Husky recruiting? I think it's still to be determined. And that's not good for a Power 5 program. You need to have kind of that core foundation of, hey, when I get this offer as a recruit, I know I'm going to get this if I look further into that. And I think that's up in the air to a degree with Washington at the moment. And the coaching transition certainly plays a role into that. And I do think on the flip side, you want to recruit regionally, and that's your base, and Seattle's a great metro to pull from right at home. But on the flip side, since 2017, how many of those high-profile battles have they actually won with the select big-name recruits in the area? So the guys who move the needle, the guys who other recruits who are maybe younger look up to, like a JT Tuimoloau, you look at those battles and say, okay, well, he went to Ohio State. Okay, what about, Jaden Wayne in this class? Well, probably not going to go to Washington. Okay, well, what's going on with Washington, right? That's kind of the natural question to go back to. I don't know the last big high-profile, local kid they got. I mean, Savell Smalls, maybe, and that's a problem. So you're having to relegate yourself regionally to recruit, and you're unable to win the big regional battles that have become national. On top of that, combined with changing coaches twice in 3 years, there's just a lack of identity with what that offer could mean, right? Me and you, again, from 30,000 feet, say, okay, DBs are going to be great at Washington defensively. You kind of start there, and then you look at other spot, positions and say, hey, they've got a chance. They've had production at running back and wide receiver, et cetera, over the years relative to the NFL draft. Today's recruit doesn't really see that outside of the secondary. And again, it's more of a developmental deal than identifying a kid that everybody wants and winning that battle and still having the chance to develop him. So I just think it's kind of the chips are down all together across the board with Washington right now. And they need that galvanizing recruit to turn things around. And again, with Jaden Wayne, there's one right in their backyard. If you could stay in that race and maybe win it, now all of a sudden, other kids will see that. But it's hard to imagine that happening as we currently sit.
Yeah, I think the only, significantly major recruit that they've been able to land in the last several years who's from their own state is probably Sam Heward, who Washington fans are still waiting to arrive because there's a good chance he won't even be the starting quarterback for the Huskies this year. And so I think you just have to find a way, like you said, to just get one. And sometimes that can get the ball rolling, and people will start to, recruits will start to view your program differently if you see like, oh, that big name guy decided to go there. And so now maybe I want to take a second look at it, or maybe I want to take a look when I wasn't considering it before. So now that Kalen DeBoer is there and starting to, he's got his staff and they're hitting the recruiting trail and whatnot, trying to get the program back to where we all know it can be. How do you think he needs to do that? What's the recruiting message, and what should the plan of attack be like for DeBoer and his staff?
I think for him, it's going to be educational more than anything. It's going to be like, hey, like if you actually take a closer look, Washington has been a great program for a long time. And with what matters most for these prospects, whether it's the NFL or NIL in some cases, you can sell that if you work it the right way, right? They've had success in developing players and towards, playing on Sundays, and they're one of these schools that's in a huge metro. So you're able to potentially say, hey, you can actually have more opportunity in a place like Seattle relative to some others in the Pac-12 or elsewhere. So I think educationally, they have to establish their footprint. And then on the field, the promise of however, Kalen got the job, which is obviously selling offense with what he did at Fresno State, that's got to start to translate. You brought in a transfer quarterback in Michael Penix. As you mentioned, Sam Heward is certainly there with the most talent in that quarterback room. It's got to translate early. So if you're a Washington fan, first of all, don't hate me. I apologize. But secondly, just hang tight. Let the season begin and go from there because it's just not one of those programs that is getting that benefit of the doubt we talked about with a David Shaw, with a Stanford, or even other programs that have transitioned with more well-known recruiters like Oregon and Dan Lanning, or certainly USC with Lincoln Riley that have jumped into the Pac-12. I think those things absolutely affect and hurt Washington on the front end of building a recruiting class. But a handful of commits are in. They just got one over the weekend on the defensive side of the ball, so maybe this is the beginning of a turnaround. But get through the summer. You'll host June official visitors. You'll have a couple more commitments, and then it's got to translate on the field. So sell the development and the history, and then counter it with some on-field perceptual success.
Husky fans are hoping that things will start to feel a little bit better and more encouraging on the recruiting trail. And whether they do or not, we'll continue to bring on John Garcia Jr., Director of Recruiting for Sports Illustrated. Great to have you on the show, as always, John.
Always a pleasure, Spencer. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate all of you for listening. I will see you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.